on the 29th to talk more about that. So speaking of money, we're going to move into our message this morning. Last week, we started a new sermon series called Redeeming Money, What Do You Treasure? Now, if you are new this morning, your family, you might be thinking, doesn't the pastor usually do a nice softball sermon on Child Dedication Sunday? There's probably guests here. Well, we didn't choose to do that. This is not a, tithing sermon or a money grab, but this is a sermon series about this idea of redeeming money. Money is talked about a lot in the Bible, by Jesus a lot. He uses it in parables. It's often seen as a good thing. We can use it to bless other people. It's a gift from God. But as we looked at last week, it's also a temptation for us to be not content, to always want more. And it's not just money, but our possessions, our stuff, our materialistic world. And so we use this phrase, redeeming money. We want to buy it back. We want to do something better with it. And ultimately, as our kind of tagline said, it's about what you treasure. It's about what's in your heart. Do you desire money? Do you desire the things that come with it? The status, the prestige, or do you desire God more than the stuff around you? Now, this is about a balancing act in many ways. One of the biggest challenges that you'll face, and I've faced with money and my stuff, is balancing what I would call wisdom and faith. And we're called to have both of these. Just a few examples. When I was in seminary, there's a friend that I had who he moved from New York City with his new wife over to Denver, Colorado. And they literally had nothing. John was his name. Didn't have a car, didn't have a sofa. I mean, they just picked up themselves and a few suitcases of clothes and moved across the country because they didn't have anything. Just trusting in faith that God would provide. I'd often see him riding his bike around campus, even in Denver, Colorado in January through the snow. Is that wise or is that faith? I ran into a pastor even recently who talked about for his own family, he does not keep a budget. Doesn't really believe in budgeting at all because he wants to just kind of trust God and not be stingy maybe with his money. Is not keeping a budget wise, or is it faith-filled? The passage we're going to look at today is from Luke 12, and you've probably heard this passage before, where Jesus tells this story of a man who things go really well for him, and his crops produce a lot, and so he tears down his barns and builds bigger barns, bigger storehouses, and then he dies, and God says, your stuff is going to go to somebody else. And I heard an author pastor preach on this one time, Tony Campolo, and he said, look, this says that we should not save for retirement. It is wrong, it is bad to have 401ks and stack up our money for the future. How do you balance some of these ideas that we should trust God for everything, but still be wise with the possessions of things that he's given to us? Should we save our money for retirement and the future? Is it wise to just give your money away, whether it's to the church or to charities? Debt, is it wise to go into debt? And all these kind of things that we have in our culture. So this morning we're going to look at both of those ideas. Wisdom and faith, and trying to balance these things in our Christian walk. So we're going to look at wisdom first. Now, I believe that God gives us wisdom on how to use his money. This is just a foundational idea that we have to all come to, is that all that we have, our money, our possessions, the cars you drove here in, are God's. We're stewards, we're managers. He owns all of it. He created all of the world, and so we're just kind of here stewarding it, managing it. So it's not our money, our possessions that we should be wise with, but it's his money. And a large part of the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, we find these books that are called wisdom books, wisdom literature. It's these books about how you should live your life. Do this. Don't do this. In the book of Proverbs, you'll find these collection of sayings about how to do your life well. It's basically, all things being equal, if you do this, this will happen. It's not a promise, but it's a smart, intelligent way to live. And Proverbs goes over all kinds of things about work, sexuality, integrity, family, money. So let's talk about wisdom with money from the book of Proverbs. Now, this might have been a wise thing to not say, but I'm a pastor and I always say the right things, but I don't know what happened yesterday. I don't know if Iowa won that game or if Iowa State lost that game. Maybe the Storm actually won. The Lightning won. That's what we'd say that, right? But wise things the Bible says about money. First off, Proverbs 6 through 11. Save and budget wisely. So, here's what it says in Proverbs. Go to the ant, O sluggard. Consider his ways or her ways and be wise. Without having any chief, officer, or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest. How long will you lie there, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep? A little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man. So he speaks to somebody he calls a sluggard, someone who's lazy, who does not take his advice. And he tells them to be wise, to use this wisdom, this proverbial sayings in the book of Proverbs. And he says, I want you to look at creation, what God has created, what he has put into creation, the wisdom he's put in there with bugs, with ants. Ants, they know how to save. They know how to budget wisely. They prepare their bread in the summer. They save their food then for the harvest when it gets to be wintertime. You guys ever seen the movie A Bug's Life? That old Pixar movie where the ants, they're kind of like slaves to the grasshoppers, and they need to kind of rise up eventually because they're making all the food for them. Just side note, that's based on The Magnificent Seven, one of my favorite all-time movies. Have you ever seen that? Not the new one, but the old Western one. Oh, it's so good. But he says, eventually, this sluggard, if you don't do this, you don't take this advice of saving, budgeting, will come to poverty. You find this idea too in Genesis, when God gives this dream to Pharaoh of what's going to happen. They're going to go through a time of blessing and then a time of nothing. And so Joseph, who's in jail, he can interpret dreams. Pharaoh comes to Joseph and he's told God has shown to Pharaoh what is about to be done. And Joseph says, take a wise person to save these things, budget wisely for the future. Budgeting, saving, it helps us to even share with other people. It's very hard to be generous when you don't budget. Say a millionaire comes to church, and every week they throw in $100 and think, I'm doing pretty good. Well, is that really being generous if it's not thinking ahead of time and praying over it and wondering, am I really being a good steward of what God has given to me? My wife and I, since we got married, we've tried to budget. I was not a good budgeter before I got married. My philosophy was always, I'll work in the summertime, and then that's just my money for the rest of the year. I'd never look at my bank account again. That was my money. But she was very good, helpful for me to think about, how do I budget, save wisely for the future? And so we're not perfect by this. I mean, in fact, yesterday we kind of like went through our budget. We had to catch up from a few months ago. That's often what we do, is we kind of like look backwards instead of planning forwards. But as a society, we're not very good at managing, budgeting our money. In fact, men, there's some research that women are much better at budgeting than men. There's even some research that younger people are better at budgeting than older. There's this kind of range in there of who budgets and saves well. Now, I provide a tool for you guys because I don't know you, I don't know your situations and budgeting, all these things. So what I do when I do pre-marriage counseling is I have a sample budget sheet that I give to all of my families to kind of walk through and talk about, because money is a major issue in relationships. So if you'd like to see that, I put some back on the table with the Bibles back there. Saving, budgeting, one wise thing that the Bible talks to us about. Next, Proverbs 22:7. Stay away from debt and credit. Now, these are kind of two sides of the same coin. If you make a credit card purchase, you're adding $100 in debt. As Americans, we have all kinds of debt, from debt with our homes to auto to student loans to credit cards to medical. I mean, on average, households have over $8,000 of credit card debt. One study I found said that U.S. consumers have about $13.5 trillion in debt. For our region, actually, in Polk County and Warren County from there, we have higher debt than the rest of Iowa and the country in auto, student loan debt, but less in medical. So that's good, you're healthier. This is what Proverbs 22:7 says. The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is the slave of the lender. So in general, as Proverbs says, those who have more money, they have more power. It's not saying that's right, that's wrong. It's just, this is what it's saying, that those who have more money, who are rich, they tend to rule over, be in places of power. And then when it gets to specifics about borrowing money, being in debt refers to it actually as slavery. A person who is in debt is essentially a slave to somebody else. If you have tons of credit card debt, if you have tons of loans or bills you have to pay, you are a slave to those things, to those people, to those lenders. Number 3, Proverbs says to invest wisely. Now, what do I mean by investing? It's this idea of through appreciation or investing in things or property that can make money. It's not like your brother-in-law comes to you and has this like secret sly advice about this fund you should go bet on. No, there's ethical, wise ways of investing with your money. Wise investing is praised in the Bible. Proverbs 31, when it talks about this woman of honor, all the things that she does. She works for her family. She does good for them. One of the things that talks about is in Proverbs 31:16 is she considers a field, buys it. With the fruit of her hand, she plants a vineyard. She sees this thing, she considers it, she buys this field to invest in it, to make money from it, and then plants this vineyard. Even when Jesus is telling a parable that we'll look at actually in a few weeks about the manager that goes away and gives some talents, some money to his disciples or people he's managing over, and he comes back and says, okay, what did you earn me? There's one guy who just hid the money in the ground And the manager, the master says, you ought to have invested my money with the bankers. And at my coming, I should receive what was my own with interest. It's kind of like, you should have at least done this. You should have at least invested it. Now there's wise, ethical ways of investing. That's not my forte to tell you about investing. I can tell you probably like investing in pumpkins right around like November 1st, probably not the best, wisest thing to do, but wise things for investing. Now, the problem is, this is only half the story. The Bible has tons of good advice we could just talk about. You should live your life this way, not this way. Be a kind, nice person. Be generous. Love others. Help those in need. But the Bible also says that all of those things, all that wisdom about money or living your life is nothing unless you are grounded in, settled in faith. We can save our money and budget really well and really be hoarders and just save it all for ourselves. We can stay away from debt and credit cards and feel really good about ourselves, trusting that we are the ones managing our money and that it all comes from us and look how great we are. Or we can invest in things that are not wise or unethical, and then all of a sudden the market tanks and then we're left with nothing but faith in the end. So how do we balance this out? How do we live this life of faith also with our money? You can be wise. Without faith, it means nothing. So God asks us also to have faith while using his money. Now let's look at a passage that Jesus speaks on, a parable that he talks about and some teaching that he does. So turn with me to Luke chapter 12, read the first half, verses 13 to 21. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or arbiter over you?" And he said to them, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life consists in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them a parable, saying, "The land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, 'What shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops.' And he said, 'I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for you many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'Fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God.'" So right away, Jesus is confronted with a man who expects him, commands him to do something. He wants Jesus to kind of set up the very first Judge Judy, Judge Jesus show, right? Right here, right now. Now it's so interesting that Jesus has been preaching, going around, and if you just look back at the heading of Luke 12, verse 8, acknowledge Christ before men. And he's been talking about the importance of confessing Jesus and having a boldness to do that. And this guy out of the crowd says, "I don't care about that. I want my money and I want it now." I don't know if you've ever watched any of these court shows on TV. When we lived in Colorado during seminary, we didn't have any cable, and so sometimes I'd watch the People's Court just to see how ridiculous it could get. Bringing these private matters to public and people being so petty and greedy over $100 and ruining family and friendships. And we're not told much about this situation. There's a brother. He's asking that he Jesus make his brother give him the inheritance? I mean, maybe there's been a death in the family, and maybe this guy coming is the younger brother. We don't know all the details, but maybe, we don't know. But he is so interested in this inheritance. And Jesus warns him. He says, that's not my job. Who made me judge over you? He says, take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, of coveting, wanting, desiring stuff or somebody else's stuff, or desiring somebody else, if you want to go in that category too. And we all have these desires, right, for somebody else's stuff, their house, their car. For a while, I was really into grilling, and I wanted my neighbor's super nice smoker and all the tools he had along with it. And what does that do to us to have this desire for stuff or somebody else's stuff? Jesus says, be careful of that. That's all this guy cares about. It's going to ruin his family relationships probably. And Jesus tells him that you cannot just worry about stuff and possessions and coveting because, he says, because one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. I told you last week about that bumper sticker you may have seen, he who dies the most toys wins. That's not what life is about. Life is not about your stacks of money like Scrooge McDuck and swimming in it and all these things you can pile up. Life is not just about materialism and the stuff you put around you. So what I'm saying this is a statement to us that Jesus is saying, okay, don't put all your life, all your stuff into possessions. Instead, you should put it into faith, into God. If you take away all this materialism, the cars, the phones we have, all we are left with is God. And that's all we are to trust in. Now, the problem for us is we live in a society, a culture that is flooded by materialism and stuff and possessions. It's part of us. I mean, if somebody came to me who was an alcoholic and said, I'm trying to beat this, I probably wouldn't encourage them to work at a bar or to live above a bar. Get away from that, go out of that. But how do you get rid of a culture you live in that is addicted to money and stuff and acquiring more and more possessions? I got to tell you, every time that I go away, out of country on a mission trip, Honduras, I've been to a few times, and I see poverty and see the things that they don't have that I have, it makes me rethink. There's something about almost a fast, a getting out of where we are to make us really see where we are. Maybe it's a mission trip. Maybe it's, fasting from all the coffee you drink, what you buy, or latest toys you buy, whatever it is. And then take that money and trying to give it away and give it to somebody else. Or, my wife, we were talking about this at home, she said to me, with all the money you spend going out to eat, you could probably sponsor other kids in other countries. That was kind of convicting. But our life should be more about putting our faith in God, not our faith in our possessions. Faith in what he's done on the cross. Faith in following him, even if all of our possessions and our junk and our stuff goes away. So Jesus then looks at the whole crowd, at this man especially too, and he says, okay, let me tell you a parable to kind of get the point home. He says, there's this rich man. Okay, we already know he's well off. He has lots of money. Maybe he's been wise with it. He's invested it, saved it, whatever it is. And then all of a sudden, his land produces a lot more. Maybe it's a fluke. Maybe it's just good farming. I don't know. But it produces a ton more. So he has this dilemma. what do I do with this? I have nowhere to store all this food. Okay, I know what I'll do. I'll tear my old stuff down and I'll build bigger barns. Maybe there was some question of should he have given it away? Should he have shared it? So then he plans to relax. He plans to this kind of hedonistic eat, drink, get drunk. I'm going to live my life of ease for the rest of my life. Maybe you noticed this, but notice all the I's and my's in his statements. He thought to himself, what shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my grain. I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. 10 times this passage, he's only thinking about himself. He even speaks to himself, soul, here's what I will do. And God says, you're a fool. This man dies, and then God says to him, where does all your stuff go? It doesn't go to you, but it goes to somebody else then. And then Jesus steps in, and he says his problem was that he laid up treasure for himself, I's, me's, my's, and he was not rich toward God. Now, again, this is a parable, so it's not saying if you're really rich, you're going to die tonight. That's not what it's saying. But his point is, through faith, we should even be rich toward God with our money and our stuff. We shouldn't hoard and keep all of this stuff. I could never sit down and watch the show Hoarders. I don't know if you guys ever done that, but I made the mistake too of Googling world's worst hoarders. And there's just terrible stories out there. Let me give you a few tame ones. Glenn, humble, self-employed, crusty surfer dude, lives in South California. In the beginning, he had 3 rats. In 2009, they escaped from their cage and burrowed into the walls of his home. 2 years later, there were 2,500 of them. I readily admit that I have way too many rats, he confessed. That's good. That's a good confession. The Humane Society later came. They removed 2,000 rats, but he saved 2. His favorites, Commander Whitehead and Captain Brownbottom. This one just amazed me too. In the late 19th century, all of New York's high society knew Ida Mayfield. Her charm and beauty attracted many suitors, and Ida eventually married Benjamin Wood, published in the New York Daily News, but the couple's marriage was an unhappy one, and Benjamin fathered a child by another woman. And to make up for his womanizing, Benjamin would give his wife large sums of money to deposit into her own savings account. Now, she lived in squalor in a couple of rooms at a hotel. By the time of her death in 1932, Ida had hoarded nearly $1 million in cash, stuffed in pots and pans inside the hotel room. Among other valuables found inside were a diamond necklace hidden in a Cracker Jack box. Ida was even found to have $10,000 in cash sealed around her waist. Jesus says, don't lay up treasure for yourself, but be rich toward God. He doesn't say, give your money to God. He says, be rich toward God. Be generous toward God. Be lavish, plentiful, liberal with your stuff, your money, your possessions toward God. Is that how you describe your giving, your stuff? That I am generous with God. I think he's essentially saying to this guy, he should have given it away. He shouldn't have just hoarded it to himself. But when he had all of this plentiful more and more, he should have opened his doors to the poor, to the needy, to anybody, and just shared. I mean, do we really believe this? Do we really believe that God is that good, that if I give generously to him, that I'll be okay? that he will support me, help me. I mean, if I give generously to church or to a Christian organization, helping out other fellow believers, helping out the poor, the needy, do we really believe that God will provide? Now, just as a side note, I don't think this parable is about like throw away your 401k and retirement. I think that can be wise. I don't think it's wise to have like an American retirement where you're basically like this guy when you retire, like, whoo, I'm just going to retire to drunkenness and do nothing. There's still some wisdom, I think, in saving your money, but this goes into our next point, that we still need to trust God that he will even provide for us if we give our money away. Let's read 22 to 34. And he said to his disciples, therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, nor about your body, what you will put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouses nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? If then you are not able to do a small a thing as that, why are you anxious about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass, which is alive in the field today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? And do not seek what you are to eat and what you are to drink, nor be worried. For all the nations of the world seek after these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you. Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions, give to the needy, provide yourselves with money bags that do not grow old, with a treasure in the heavens that does not fail, where no thief approaches and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. It's interesting that the word life and soul, it's the same throughout this passage. When the farmer is saying to himself, soul, it's the same thing that he's talking about in this next chapter about life is more than food. Your soul, you who you are, it's more than just food and these things. He says to all of us that our life is more than just about our possessions, our stuff, and that God will provide for us. He says, look to the ravens. They get food from God. God cares for them. They are valuable, but we, people, are more valuable than birds or lilies, who are clothed even more in splendor than Solomon. He says that God cares more about birds and flowers and things, cares more about you than those things. And does this mean that God will just drop clothing and food on your door? No. I think what he's warning us of is this anxious, worrying, fear, striving, everything after what I'll wear, the food I'll eat. Maybe it's about status or the striving after these things that in the end they don't really mean much. He assures us that God knows what we need. He knows our basic necessities. And he says, don't seek after, go with all of your might, run after those things. He says instead, seek the kingdom. Seek Jesus. Seek his right, good rule in your life to tell you to be generous toward God, to give your stuff away, that he still will provide for you. He says God desires you to have the kingdom, not just to be rich and wealthy, but he desires that you will have the kingdom. I mean, it's a question for all of us. Do we think about and desire and worry about our stuff more than we think about and desire God? And then maybe one of the most hardest things he says, in the end, he says that we should sell all of our things and give them to the needy. Now, we don't find every believer in the Bible poor, giving all their stuff away. If God were to come to you now, tonight, and say, you should sell all of your things, would that be the end? Would you just walk away? I mean, how hard would that be for you? How much are you invested in your stuff over God? There's a story of the man who comes to Jesus and he's questioning him about what's the greatest commandment, and you have this dialogue back and forth, and the man says, I've done all these things. And Jesus, who knows him, who loves him, looks at him and says, then go sell all of your stuff. And the man walks away because he was rich and how hard that was for him. I wonder in our society, in our culture, in our American society, if God were to come to us and say, I want you to sell all your stuff and to give it away, and he does right here, right? Would we be able to? Would we still follow Jesus if we had nothing except for him? Would you? Could you do that? I want to end with this question and a quote. He says this here in the end, for where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. He looks to all of us in the eyes and says, what you desire, what you treasure, what you yearn for, that's what shows what you love, you worship, you seek after. It's so tied into us, what we desire and our heart and our worship. Jim Elliot, this missionary who actually died for his faith, he said this: he is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain that which he cannot lose. He is no fool who gives away what he cannot keep to gain that which he cannot lose. Believer, do that this week. Give generously toward God with your money, your stuff, your time, who you are, to gain what you cannot lose, Christ's amazing and perfect kingdom. Would you pray with me? Father, you have given us so much. You've given us a lot to be thankful for in this place we live in this church, the cars we drove here in, our wallets, our phones, all of this stuff. But God, it can be such a temptation to hoard it, to keep it to ourselves. God, I feel it in my own life to just keep it. Father, help me to have faith in you and not in my bank account. Help me to have faith in you and not in my car or my 401k, but help me to put all my faith, my trust totally in you, Jesus, that if I have nothing, if you take it all away, I am still satisfied totally in you. Father, I can't do this alone. I cannot do that by my own desire. So God, turn our hearts. Draw us to you. Help us to desire you above all else, to treasure you. Father, we pray this now, and we worship you now. In Jesus' name, amen.